Today I'm changing the timing belt and auxiliary belts on a P3 2.4 D5 Volvo V70. This will cover the other models from the same era, such as the S80. Now, this isn't going to be as in-depth a video as my Euro 3 V70 that I've already done. I'm just going to point out the major differences and go through the full procedure again. This video is more to show the differences between the earlier models and the later models. So we've got an engine mount on this side that needs to be removed, and there are actually two auxiliary belts rather than the one that you get on the earlier model engine. Now, this isn't going to be a start to finish how-to, but the most important parts will be included. I've already removed the wheel arch liner, which was held on with T25 Torx and 10mm plastic nuts. There was also a plastic cover here, which has two trim clips holding it on. It's also important that we support the engine from underneath, obviously without causing any damage. We've got a nice flat sump, so supported the engine with a jack underneath, because on this later model we need to remove this upper engine mount on the left hand side of the engine. So to remove the engine cover on the P3 Volvos, we need to lift up the outside of these trim clips at the same time as pressing down the inside. Loosen the coolant expansion tank. We've got an 8mm bolt up here, and then it just sits on a piece of metal here, and then we can just lift it out of position. But we don't need to remove it fully, we just need space to get to this bolt here and pull it out so that we can remove the top part of the engine mount. $15mm bolt, and then we've got a nut and bolt at the back. What looks like a nut and bolt at the back just seems to be a 15mm bolt. That gets the mount out of the way. Not sure yet whether the lower engine mount needs removing, but we've got the timing belt cover that we can remove once we've removed that 10mm nut here. It's actually 8mm, and you'll need a deep socket to get to it. I'm really struggling with the tools that I've got. Too long. engine a little bit, which allowed us to get the socket out. Now we should be able to finally remove the timing cover. So this engine has 50k on it. The owner isn't sure whether the belt has been replaced or not, and as you can see already, just to get the timing cover off, we had to remove the engine mount. So there wasn't particularly a way other than bending the cover back. It's a little bit shiny, but it doesn't look to be in a condition which you would need to be concerned about. So now we need to remove the auxiliary belts. So we'll need to release the belt tensioner and get both the belts out of the way. To loosen the auxiliary belt, we need to insert a T60 Torx in the tensioner and turn anti-clockwise. Okay. Now we're ready to remove the crank pulley nut. Now I've removed the 4 bolts around the outside. If you need to lock the crank pulley, you'll need these bolts out, and then you'll need to insert the tool, and then you'll be able to undo the nut. But if you have a powerful enough impact gun, then with a 30mm socket you should be able to remove the nut. So this part here, I found out when it failed on my V70, is actually just a harmonic dampener between the auxiliary belt and the crank pulley. So the crank pulley is behind this. Now replacing the crank pulley nut, we can use this to turn over the engine. So we need to get the engine in time now. So as you can see, we've got this mark on the crank pulley, and we've got this mark on the timing case, or the oil pump. This is the oil pump on the earlier versions. There seems to be a plastic cover on this one. So we need that to be lined up with the mark behind, but we also need the cam to be lined up. So as you can see, on the crank we're pretty close, but on the cam we are 1 revolution or half a revolution out. So I'm going to turn the engine over using the nut until the crank is lined up with the mark behind. So you have to be very careful at this point that you don't go past the mark, because once you do, you can't then turn anti-clockwise. You can only turn in a clockwise direction. So I feel like I'm going to slip past it because I'm only using one hand. So that's perfectly on the mark for the crankshaft, and as you can see, we're now timed up on the cam as well. There are locking pins for the cam and the crank, but as long as we're well aware of what we're doing, stick the car in gear and obviously while removing the timing belt, make sure that the crank and the cams stay lined up. So now we're going to remove the tension from the timing belt with the hex here, undo this bolt here, so I've got 6mm hex in there. I'm just going to turn it so that the belt is completely loose. And then if you're still struggling to get the belt off, you can pull the sprung part here, or perhaps even easier, just remove the tensioner completely, as we'll be replacing it anyway. So probably the original belt. Not really in too bad condition for 8 years old. Due to being in a bit of a rush to put the car back together, if you do want a full informative video on how to do the timing belt, I have already got a video on here, and the rest of it is the same as that on the Euro 3 engine. Change the tensioner and the idle pulley, and tension the tensioner to between here for UK and Europe. So you'll want to see that sat just there, and then tighten the bolt. So tension it with this, and then tension with the 6mm hex, and tighten the bolt in the middle with the tensioner sat in the centre here. Replace the idle pulley and refit the belt. Once you've got the new belt fitted, turn the crankshaft 2 full revolutions and check that the lines still mark up top and bottom. It is two crank turns for one cam turn. Yeah, we'll bang on that.